In 2019, Neil was going through a really rough time and was having a really hard time being around people. So he decided to pack up all of his things and go live by himself at the age of 30 out in the woods. Now, he was scouting an area in Delaware County in the suburbs of Philadelphia looking for the perfect camping spot. And after testing out some different areas and having some bad experiences, like his tent flooding after some heavy rains, he found what he thought was the perfect camping spot. It was secluded away from everybody and everything and surrounded by a nice large creek. And it was surrounded by all kinds of large trees. So it looked perfect. He decided this is where he's going to set up camp. Now, the tent that he had was a one-person tent, so it was just big enough for him to sleep in. But that's pretty much all he needed. So he was pretty much set. All he had left to do was to set up a barrier with some branches to keep other people out and to hide his tent. So after putting up this huge wall of branches in the area and setting up some tripwires around his camp, he just started living his life. And he was there for many days before the incident that changed his life. Now, Neil says, just to put things into perspective, it would be really difficult for anyone to find this campsite at the top of this hill. It was really remote. And in fact, even his brother, who would meet him occasionally just to drop off supplies, didn't know where the actual campsite was. So on one beautiful summer night, after it had just rained really heavy, Neil is laying outside of his tent, kind of leaning up against the hill. And the whole area is covered in a dense fog. It just looked like everything was covered in this huge cloud. And he had taken a long walk earlier, so he was pretty tired. So he crawled into his tent, probably about 10 o'clock. So he crawls into his tent where he has all of his equipment there. So it's kind of cramped inside, and he zips it up. And he just settles in, starts relaxing. He's reading a good book, and he notices it's getting kind of late. So he puts out his flashlight, puts on his headlamp, and just chilled. And periodically, he would text with his sister just to let her know that he was okay and chat about things and find out what was going on in her world. So pretty soon it rolls around to about 1 a.m. and he gets hit with this really strange feeling. You know, that feeling that something is just wrong. And he tried to shrug it off, but it wouldn't go away. So he laid there with his headlamp on, fully illuminating the inside of the tent. And the tent only has a little screened-in area at the top of one side. So other than that, you can't really see what's going on outside of the tent. So he starts reading again, and suddenly he hears something start running toward his tent on the left side and stop right outside the tent and start barking at him like a loud dog who's just about to attack. And Neil starts to just shudder and shake with fear, thinking that there's no way that a dog could get all the way up this hill and past the wood barriers and all of the trip lines. At least not without an extreme struggle and making a lot of noise. So in complete fear and panic, after hearing this barking and growling, he fumbles to get his phone. And in a panic, he starts texting his sister, saying there's something outside my tent and it's pretty pissed off. And she says, well, maybe it's a dog. But Neil tells his sister there's no way the dog could get up this hill. So whatever this thing is stops harassing him and disappears after about 10 minutes. But he was super freaked. So he got his phone and he dialed 911 and just held on to it in case that thing came back. And after an hour passes and nothing happens, Neil begins to relax a little bit, kicks off his shoes, cracks a beer, and starts reading again. So as time starts to pass, there's still no sign of the creature, but he is just way too horrified to even look outside of his tent. And it starts to roll around to about 3 a.m. and the ground is still covered in fog and he still has his phone in his hand. Then, in a sudden moment, he is completely paralyzed by fear, a state of fear so intense that he thinks he's gonna die. Then something grabbed him, and whatever grabbed him started picking him up and smashing him back down on the ground. This thing was so strong, Neil says he felt like he was a rag doll. It just kept squeezing and shaking him as if he were nothing. And he looked at the phone in his hand and he tried desperately to move his thumb to the dial button so he could dial 911, but it was impossible. And this thing was breathing so loud and making noises so sinister that Neil says he had the impression that whatever it is came straight out of hell. The cries from it were almost like a loud pulsing sound, similar to like a heartbeat out of control. And whatever it is, beat the living hell out of Neil. And after fighting for somewhere between like 5 and 10 minutes and being completely paralyzed, it just stopped. And the state of fear he was in was so intense at that moment. But he took his thumb and he hit the dial button on his cell phone to dial 911. And he got a girl dispatcher on the line. But he thought to himself, what am I going to say? I'm in the middle of nowhere and I was attacked by something. No one is going to take this seriously. So he hung up the phone and started texting his sister saying, hey, this is the location that I'm in and I was just attacked by something. And he got no answer, so he just kept texting. But still, no answer. So he just cowered in his tent for the next few hours until the sun came up. And he was so worn out from that beatdown that when he crawled out, he was in extreme pain. But after a complete search of the area for footprints or some sign that something had been there, Neil comes up completely empty. No branches were moved, no lines were tripped, and the tent wasn't damaged. Which didn't make any sense to Neil because he was damaged. He could barely walk. Eventually, Neil moved his campsite and got a bigger tent and still doesn't know what it was that attacked him. Nor does he know what was barking outside of his tent. But he is scared to this day, knowing that there are things out there that are so powerful, they can literally paralyze you just by coming close to you. And apparently beat the hell out of you through your tent without leaving any sign of having been there. Was it a Dogman? Neil doesn't know, but he says it could have killed him very easily if it had wanted to. It could have made him a missing person in a heartbeat.